The gleaming showroom of Henderson's luxury autos radiated opulence. Every detail in the dealership was designed to impress, from the marble flooring that reflected the dazzling overhead lights to the meticulously arranged rows of luxury cars that spoke of power and prestige. The scent of polished leather mixed with the faint hint of car wax created an atmosphere that whispered success. Clients in tailored suits wandered around, casually discussing high-end vehicles with eager salespeople, their eyes wide with the anticipation of a significant investment. At the heart of the showroom stood Jake Henderson, the senior salesman. With decades of experience in the industry, Jake was the face of Henderson's and prided himself on being able to read a potential customer the moment they walked through the door. He had a sixth sense, or so he thought, about who was there to buy and who was wasting time. The designer suit he wore was as sharp as his gaze, and today was no different. As usual, he scanned the room with his hawk-like eyes, zeroing in on a well-dressed couple who had just stepped inside. "Good afternoon, sir." "Ma'am," Jake said, flashing his practiced smile. "Looking for something special today?" As the couple nodded, Jake's confidence swelled. He mentally calculated the commission he would earn from selling them one of the dealership's top-tier models. His attention was fully on them when the showroom's glass doors slid open again. In walked Jamal King. Jamal wasn't dressed like the other customers. While most visitors wore sleek suits or designer outfits, Jamal was clad in a simple hoodie, jeans, and a pair of well-worn sneakers. He moved quietly, his expression calm, his eyes scanning the cars without the wide-eyed excitement that often betrayed a window shopper. Despite his casual demeanor, there was something measured and intentional in the way Jamal carried himself. But to Jake, none of that mattered. Jake glanced at him once, made a quick judgment, and returned his attention to the well-dressed couple. Jamal strolled along the rows of luxury cars, pausing every so often to inspect a model closely. His fingers grazed the smooth surface of a sleek sports car, a limited edition, parked proudly at the center of the room. To most onlookers, Jamal might have seemed like someone out of place, just a man dreaming of something far out of his reach. But Jamal had a purpose today. This was not his first time in a luxury car dealership, nor was he here to dream. He had the money, more than enough, to buy any car in this place. In fact, he could buy the entire showroom if he wanted. But he had long since learned that people like Jake often failed to see beyond the surface. Jamal continued his inspection, mentally narrowing down his options. He caught the eye of another salesman, a young man who seemed eager to assist. But before the young man could approach him, Jake's voice rang out across the showroom. "Tom, help our friends over there with the new Aston Martin," Jake said, pointing to the well-dressed couple at the front of the store. Tom, the younger salesman, hesitated for a moment, glancing between Jake and Jamal. He gave a brief nod before rushing over to the couple, leaving Jamal to fend for himself. Jamal sighed, shaking his head slightly. He had seen this play out many times before. There was always an assumption, an unspoken bias, that people like him didn't belong in spaces like this. It was a story as old as time. In some ways, he had grown used to it, but today he wasn't in the mood to be ignored. He walked up to the car he was most interested in, a brand new Ferrari, the type of car that could cost as much as a small house. Its glossy red paint sparkled under the showroom lights, and the roar of its engine was known to be as impressive as its price tag. He was about to run his hand along the hood when Jake finally noticed him again. "Hey, buddy," Jake called out, waving dismissively. "You might want to check out our pre-owned section. We've got some great deals over there." Jamal looked up at Jake, meeting his gaze, but didn't say anything right away. Instead, he let the words hang in the air, unflinching. Jake's tone was polite on the surface, but the condescension was unmistakable. It was clear Jake had no idea who he was talking to. "No thanks," Jamal finally said, his voice steady. "I'm interested in this one." Jake raised an eyebrow, the skepticism practically dripping from his expression. He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head slightly. "This one? It's a bit out of most people's price range, but if you're serious—" He trailed off, not bothering to finish the sentence, and motioned toward a less expensive model parked nearby. "You might find this one more manageable." Jamal's jaw clenched, but he kept his cool. He had no interest in explaining himself. He wasn't here for a debate. He was here to buy, and Jake's attitude wasn't going to change that. "Let me know if you're serious about something," Jake added with a dismissive wave, turning back to his well-dressed clients who were now admiring an Aston Martin. Jamal stood for a moment, letting the subtle sting of the encounter pass. He wasn't in the habit of proving his worth to anyone, but today, maybe today would be different. With a quiet determination, he continued his stroll around the Ferrari, his decision already made. Jamal took another slow lap around the Ferrari, his eyes tracing the sleek lines of the car. He could feel Jake's dismissive attitude lingering in the air, but it didn't faze him. This wasn't his first encounter with someone who thought they knew him based on what they saw on the surface. Growing up, Jamal had learned early that people often judged books by their covers, and in his case, they usually got the story wrong. He tapped his phone, sending a quick message to a friend, then leaned in to get a closer look at the Ferrari's interior. The smell of new leather wafted out as he opened the door, a small smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. He could already imagine himself behind the wheel, cruising through the city with the top down, the engines purr like music to his ears. Jake, meanwhile, was across the showroom, deep in conversation with the well-dressed couple. He occasionally glanced over at Jamal, still assuming the man was out of his league. Every now and then, Jake would smirk to himself, as if amused by Jamal's persistence. To him, the situation was clear. This was just another guy who wandered into the dealership, dreaming big but lacking the bank account to back it up. "You know," Jake said to the couple, his voice dripping with charm, "there's nothing quite like the feel of an Aston Martin. Smooth, powerful, and with just enough edge to turn heads wherever you go." The couple nodded, clearly captivated by Jake's sales pitch. He was in his element, playing the role of the knowledgeable salesman who could open doors to the world of luxury. As far as he was concerned, this couple was a guaranteed sale. They dressed the part, spoke the part, and most importantly to Jake, looked like they belonged. But even as Jake worked the room, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He glanced over again, spotting Jamal still inspecting the Ferrari. He sighed quietly, shaking his head. "Some people just don't know their limits," he muttered under his breath. Jamal wasn't oblivious to Jake's attitude, but he chose not to react. He had long ago mastered the art of staying cool in situations like this. "Let people think what they want," he often told himself. In the end, the truth always comes out. As Jamal circled the car, a familiar voice called out from across the room. "Jamal, my man, I didn't expect to see you here." Jamal turned to see his old friend Marcus strolling toward him with a wide grin. Marcus was a sharp-dressed businessman, the kind who commanded attention wherever he went. He had made his fortune in real estate and was no stranger to places like Henderson's Luxury Autos. In fact, he was a regular. "What's up, Marcus?" Jamal greeted him with a handshake that turned into a friendly shoulder bump. "Just checking out the selection." Marcus's laughter filled the room. "Man, you're always checking out the selection. You gonna pull the trigger on one of these bad boys, or you just window shopping?" Jamal grinned, glancing back at the Ferrari. "I think today might be the day." Across the room, Jake's ears perked up. He turned slightly, catching sight of Marcus, a known high roller in the dealership. His interest piqued, and for the first time, he began to wonder if he had misjudged the situation. Marcus was one of their top clients, someone who didn't waste time with nonsense. If he was greeting Jamal like an old friend, maybe, just maybe, there was more to this casually dressed man than Jake had assumed. But still, Jake wasn't convinced. "Do you know him?" the well-dressed woman Jake had been helping asked, noticing Jake's sudden distraction. No, not really," Jake replied quickly, trying to brush off the moment. "Just someone window shopping, I think." As Jake turned back to his customers, Marcus and Jamal continued their conversation, oblivious to the attention they were now drawing. Marcus leaned in closer, inspecting the Ferrari Jamal had been eyeing. "This is a beast, man. You thinking about buying?" Jamal nodded, still cool and collected. "Yeah, this one's calling my name. I've been looking for something new, something with a little more power." Marcus laughed, clearly impressed. "Man, you've got good taste. I just picked up something similar last month. You can't go wrong with a Ferrari." The ladies love it. Jamal smirked but didn't say much. Marcus always had a way of turning every conversation into a joke about his success with women. But Jamal wasn't here to flex. He was just here to make a purchase, and frankly, the sooner he could get it done, the better. As they continued talking, the mood in the room shifted. Other salespeople started to take notice of the two men, quietly whispering to each other as they realized that Marcus, one of their VIP clients, was giving Jamal his full attention. Slowly, the dynamic began to change. What had started as an unnoticed moment was now drawing curious glances from all corners of the room. Jake, still trying to sell the Aston Martin to the couple, felt a wave of irritation wash over him. He couldn't figure out why, but something about Jamal and Marcus's easy conversation rubbed him the wrong way. Part of him wanted to step in to assert his dominance as the top salesman, but something held him back. For now, he would focus on the couple, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he had missed something important. Meanwhile, Jamal was wrapping up his conversation with Marcus. "Well," Jamal said, glancing back at the Ferrari, "I think I'm ready. I just need someone to write it up." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this one? It's a monster on the road. You're going to be tearing up the streets," Jamal chuckled. "I've got a lot to tear up." With that, Jamal turned, looking around for someone to help him finalize the deal. He caught the eye of one of the younger salesmen, but before the guy could approach, Jake swooped in. "Are we all set over here?" Jake said, forcing a smile as he approached. The tone of his voice was different now, less dismissive, more cautious. He had clearly noticed the shift in the room and was no longer as certain about Jamal's financial standing. Jamal nodded. "Yeah, I'm ready to buy." Jake blinked, momentarily caught off guard. He had spent the last hour ignoring Jamal, assuming he wasn't serious, but now, face to face with the reality of the situation, Jake was forced to shift gears. "Well, let's talk numbers then," Jake said, trying to regain his footing. "This Ferrari is one of our top models, so we're looking at a base price of—" "I'm aware of the price," Jamal interrupted, his voice steady but firm. "Just write it up. I'm paying cash." Jake's mouth dropped open just for a second before he caught himself. He blinked again, his mind racing as he tried to process what he had just heard. Cash? For this car? Suddenly, the assumptions he had made about Jamal started to crumble, leaving him with a sense of confusion and a little bit of shame. The sun poured in through the dealership's glass walls, casting a warm glow across the showroom floor. But for Jake Henderson, it felt like the walls were closing in. Jamal's words, "I'm paying cash," echoed in his head, unraveling the confidence he had in reading people. For years, he had prided himself on being able to spot serious buyers from time wasters, but now, standing face to face with Jamal, he realized he had completely miscalculated. Jamal's calm, unwavering gaze pierced through Jake's thin veneer of professionalism. There was no sign of hesitation, no trace of uncertainty. Jamal knew exactly what he wanted, and he had the means to get it. Jake, suddenly feeling off balance, fumbled for words. "Well, that's fantastic," Jake finally managed, his smile tight. "I'll get the paperwork started right away." As Jake turned on his heel, hurrying toward his office, his mind raced. He had spent the last hour completely ignoring Jamal, brushing him off like he wasn't worth the time. Now, as he prepared to process what could be one of the biggest sales of the month, the weight of his mistake settled heavily on his shoulders. He had to find a way to salvage this situation before it slipped completely out of his control. Meanwhile, Jamal remained unfazed. He strolled back over to the Ferrari, taking in the details of the car he would soon own. The glossy red paint shimmered under the showroom lights, and the sleek lines of the vehicle promised speed and power. It wasn't just about owning a luxury car, it was about the feeling of independence and freedom that came with it. As he leaned against the car, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from Marcus. "You sure you want this one? Let me know if you need help negotiating." Jamal chuckled softly. Marcus was always trying to be helpful, but Jamal didn't need any assistance today. He had everything under control. He quickly typed back, "I got this. Thanks, though." Across the room, the younger salesman, Tom, watched the interaction unfold. He had seen the shift in the atmosphere when Marcus arrived and noticed how Jamal carried himself. Unlike Jake, Tom hadn't dismissed Jamal based on his appearance. In fact, he had wanted to approach him earlier, but Jake had taken over, as usual, forcing Tom to step aside. Now, Tom watched as Jake scrambled to recover, wondering how different things might have gone if Jake had treated Jamal with the respect he deserved from the beginning. Jamal and Marcus walked out of the dealership, the sound of the automatic doors sliding shut behind them. The fresh air outside was a sharp contrast to the tense atmosphere they had just left inside. Marcus, always quick with a joke, slapped Jamal on the back and laughed. "Man, you handled that way better than I would have," Marcus said, shaking his head. "If it were me, I would have called him out in front of the whole showroom. You really kept it cool." Jamal smiled, though it was a little tighter than usual. "Yeah, well, you know how it is. I've been through this before. No need to get worked up about it." Marcus nodded, though his expression grew more serious. "I get that, but still, it's messed up. Every time, and it's not like they don't know you've got money. You'd think people would have learned by now." Jamal shrugged, pushing his hands into his pockets. "People see what they want to see. As far as Jake's concerned, I was just another guy who didn't fit his idea of what a real buyer looks like." Marcus let out a low whistle. "Still, you played it smooth. When you dropped that cash line, I thought Jake was going to faint." Dude's face went pale. They both laughed, the tension from the dealership already fading. For Jamal, it wasn't about making Jake feel small. It was about asserting his own place in a world where people constantly underestimated him. It was about moving through life on his own terms, no matter what anyone else thought. As they reached their cars, Marcus leaned against his sleek black Range Rover, looking back at the dealership. "You think Jake's going to learn anything from this?" Jamal glanced over his shoulder, then back at Marcus. "I don't know, man. Maybe. But that's not really my concern. He's got to figure that out for himself." Marcus nodded, appreciating Jamal's perspective. "True that. Well, you let me know if you need anything. I'll swing by tomorrow to check out that beauty when you pick it up." Jamal gave Marcus a nod before climbing into his own car, a modest, understated sedan that drew no attention. He liked it that way. He didn't need the flash to prove anything. As he drove off, the cool hum of the engine calmed his mind, allowing him to process the day's events in peace. Inside the dealership, Jake sat back at his desk, staring at the paperwork Jamal had just signed. He had done this 1,000 times, signed deals, sealed transactions, made the sale. But this one felt different. The reality of how he had treated Jamal gnawed at him, a bitter reminder of how easily he had let his prejudices influence his behavior. "I should have known better," he thought, frustration creeping into his chest. Jake prided himself on being a professional, but today he had allowed his biases to get in the way, and now he was paying for it. Not just with a bruised ego, but with the realization that he had let his assumptions shape how he treated someone who, by all accounts, had been nothing but respectful and patient. Across the showroom, Tom, the younger salesman, watched Jake from a distance. He had seen everything. And though he hadn't said a word, he knew Jake had screwed up. Tom had wanted to step in earlier, but Jake had made it clear who was in charge. Now it was too late for that. The sale was done, but the damage to Jake's reputation wasn't so easily repaired. Tom approached Jake's desk, clearing his throat. "Hey, Jake, everything good with the deal?" Jake looked up, startled out of his thoughts. Yeah, everything's fine," he muttered, though his voice was tight. Tom hesitated, sensing the tension. "Look, man, I know it's not my place, but maybe next time don't judge a customer so quickly, you know? That guy, Jamal, he's legit. Marcus wouldn't hang with someone who's just window shopping." Jake sighed, rubbing his temples. He knew Tom was right, but it didn't make the sting any easier to bear. "I get it, Tom," Jake said quietly. "I messed up." Tom nodded, sensing that Jake wasn't in the mood for a lecture. "It happens. Just learn from it, man. You can't treat everyone the same. People aren't always what they seem." Jake watched as Tom walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The hum of the showroom buzzed around him, but for the first time, Jake felt like he wasn't really part of it. His confidence had taken a hit, and he wasn't sure how to regain his footing. As the day wore on, Jake tried to shake off the lingering unease that clung to him like a shadow. He busied himself with small tasks, filing paperwork, making calls, but his mind kept drifting back to Jamal. How had he gotten it so wrong? Why had he been so quick to judge? It wasn't the first time Jake had made snap judgments about a customer, but this was the first time it had truly backfired. Jamal wasn't just another guy browsing expensive cars. He was a serious buyer with more wealth than Jake had ever guessed. And the worst part was, Jake had dismissed him without even giving him a chance. By the end of the day, Jake felt drained. He locked up his desk, grabbed his coat, and headed for the exit. The night had fallen, and the quiet of the parking lot gave him a brief moment of clarity. As he walked to his car, he couldn't help but feel a sense of regret that went beyond the sale. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, and Jake knew he had failed on that front. He slid into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. Tomorrow, Jamal would be back to pick up the Ferrari, and Jake would have to face him again. There would be no escaping it. He would have to stand there and hand over the keys to a man he had so thoroughly underestimated. And maybe that was the real lesson here. Not just about sales or business, but about how easily people's assumptions could blind them to what was right in front of them. Jake wasn't sure if he was ready to face that truth, but he knew one thing for certain. When Jamal returned tomorrow, he wouldn't make the same mistake again. Back at Jake's desk, the air felt thick as he punched numbers into the system. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard as he processed the full amount of the sale. Cash. The words still rattled around in his brain, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a sale. This was a reminder that he had let his assumptions cloud his judgment. Jake wasn't used to being wrong, and the realization that he had overlooked Jamal stung. He had let appearances dictate his treatment of a customer, and now he was paying for it with a bruised ego. He glanced over his shoulder at Jamal, who was casually leaning against the Ferrari, his expression calm and patient, as if the entire encounter had been nothing more than a routine transaction. Jake sighed, his mind whirling. As he printed out the paperwork, he rehearsed what he would say when he walked back over. He needed to smooth this over somehow. Apologize, maybe? No, that would be too direct, too obvious. Jake prided himself on maintaining control in every situation, and he wasn't ready to admit defeat. He grabbed the folder of documents and made his way back across the showroom. As he approached Jamal, he plastered on a smile, determined to regain control of the situation. "All right, Mr. King," Jake began, his voice carrying a tone of false cheerfulness. "We've got everything ready for you. Just a few signatures, and we'll have you driving off in style." Jamal nodded, his expression unreadable. He took the folder from Jake's hand and began flipping through the documents, his movements steady and deliberate. Jake stood by awkwardly, watching as Jamal skimmed the terms of the purchase. As Jamal looked over the contract, Marcus reappeared, strolling back into the conversation as if he owned the place. "So, everything good here?" Marcus asked, glancing between Jake and Jamal. "Yeah," Jamal said calmly, "just going through the fine print." Jake cleared his throat, trying to insert himself back into the conversation. "You're in great hands, Mr. King. This car is top of the line. You're making an excellent choice." Jamal didn't respond immediately. He simply continued reading the contract, letting the silence linger just long enough for Jake to feel uncomfortable. Finally, Jamal looked up, his eyes locking with Jake's. "I know it's a good choice," Jamal said quietly. "I've done my research." There was no arrogance in his voice, no need to prove anything. Jamal wasn't here to boast or flaunt his wealth. He was simply a man making a purchase, a man who expected to be treated with respect regardless of how he looked or what he wore. Jake shifted uncomfortably, sensing the subtext in Jamal's words. This wasn't just about the car anymore. This was about respect. Jake's mouth went dry as he nodded. "Of course. I didn't mean to imply otherwise." Marcus, sensing the tension, let out a low chuckle. "Jake, man, you need to relax. My guy Jamal here knows exactly what he's doing. Always has." Jake forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Of course. I can see that." Jamal remained silent, signing the last of the documents with a steady hand. As he handed the folder back to Jake, he took a deep breath and gave Jake one final look, this time with a glimmer of something that could almost be mistaken for pity. "Thanks," Jamal said, his voice cool. "I'll be by tomorrow to pick it up." Jake swallowed hard, nodding as he took the folder back. "We'll have it ready for you," he promised, though his words felt small in the face of the quiet power Jamal carried with him. As Jamal and Marcus made their way toward the exit, Jake stood frozen in place, the weight of his mistake settling in his chest. For the first time in his career, Jake wasn't thinking about the sale or the commission. He wasn't even thinking about the car. He was thinking about the man he had judged too quickly and how that judgment had revealed something about himself he wasn't ready to confront. The next day dawned clear and bright, but for Jake, it felt like a heavy cloud still hung over him. As he stepped into the dealership, he felt a wave of anxiety settle in his chest. Today was the day Jamal would come back to pick up the Ferrari, and there was no escaping the confrontation that Jake knew was coming. The dealership hummed with activity as usual, but for Jake, the rhythm felt off. Every footstep echoed louder than it should. Every conversation in the showroom seemed distant, as if the world around him was moving at a slower pace. He had gone through the morning motions, greeting customers and working on paperwork, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the previous day over and over again. The clock on the wall ticked slowly toward midday, and with every passing minute, Jake's anticipation grew. Finally, just after lunch, the glass doors at the entrance slid open, and Jamal walked in. He was dressed similarly to the day before, casual but confident. His face was calm, but his posture carried a sense of quiet determination. This time, Jake didn't need to be reminded to take Jamal seriously. He walked over to greet him, trying to appear as professional as possible, but the tension was clear in his forced smile. "Mr. King, welcome back," Jake said, his voice a little stiffer than usual. "Your Ferrari is ready for you." Jamal nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thanks," he said simply, glancing around the showroom. Jake motioned toward the service bay where the Ferrari had been prepped and polished for delivery. "We've got it detailed and ready for you. You'll be the first to take it out on the road." Jamal followed Jake silently, his hands in his pockets as they walked toward the car. Jake's heart raced as they approached the gleaming red vehicle. Even after everything, there was a part of him that still felt uneasy about how this would play out. Jamal had been nothing but calm and collected the entire time, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to come. As they reached the Ferrari, Jake stepped aside, allowing Jamal to take it in. The car looked like a work of art, every inch polished to perfection. Jake had no doubt that it would be one of the finest cars on the road, and the sight of it always brought a sense of pride. But today, that pride felt hollow. Jamal circled the car once, running his hand along the hood just as he had done the day before. He took a deep breath, then turned to Jake, who was standing awkwardly to the side, holding the keys. There was a moment of silence between them, and Jake could feel the weight of the unsaid words hanging in the air. He knew he needed to say something, anything, to address what had happened the day before. His heart pounded in his chest as he fumbled for the right words. "Mr. King," Jake began, his voice hesitant, I want to apologize for how I treated you yesterday. I misjudged you, and that was wrong. I didn't give you the respect you deserve, and for that, I'm sorry." Jamal looked at Jake, his face unreadable for a long moment. Then, with a small nod, he responded, his voice calm and measured. "I appreciate that, Jake, but this isn't just about me. You see, I've been in this position before, judged by the way I look, dismissed because of assumptions. It's something a lot of people go through, and it's tiring." Jake's stomach twisted with guilt. He had expected Jamal to be upset, but the calmness in his voice made the truth sting even more. Jamal wasn't just talking about one bad experience in a car dealership. He was talking about a lifetime of being underestimated, of being treated as less than because of preconceived notions. Jamal continued, "I don't need an apology from you just for yesterday. What I want is for you to think about how you treat people going forward. It's not about money or status, it's about respect." Jake swallowed hard, his face burning with shame. He had never thought of himself as a prejudiced person, but Jamal's words hit him like a punch to the gut. He realized now how blind he had been, how easily he had fallen into the trap of making snap judgments based on appearances. "You're right," Jake said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "I've been doing this for so long that I didn't even realize I was making those kinds of assumptions. I'm sorry, Jamal. I'll do better." Jamal nodded again, his expression softening just a little. "That's all I'm asking. We've all got room to grow." Jake handed over the keys, his hands trembling slightly. As Jamal took them, there was a brief moment of understanding between the two men, an unspoken agreement that this interaction, while painful, had been necessary. Jamal slid into the driver's seat, adjusting himself comfortably behind the wheel. The Ferrari purred to life with a low, satisfying rumble. He revved the engine once, testing its power, and then looked up at Jake one last time. "Take care, Jake," Jamal said, his tone carrying a hint of finality. "You too, Mr. King," Jake replied, watching as Jamal backed out of the service bay and smoothly navigated the Ferrari onto the main road. As the roar of the engine faded into the distance, Jake stood there, feeling strangely lighter. He had made a mistake, but maybe, just maybe, he had learned something from it. He turned back toward the dealership, ready to face the rest of the day with a new perspective. The sound of the Ferrari's engine faded into the distance, leaving Jake standing alone at the entrance of the dealership. For a long moment, he remained still, staring down the road where Jamal had driven off. The day was sunny, but the light didn't seem to reach him. It felt like everything that had happened over the past 2 days had shifted something inside him. As he walked back toward the showroom, Jake found himself replaying the conversation he'd just had with Jamal. The words, respect, and assumptions echoed in his mind, digging deeper into the parts of himself he wasn't ready to face. He had built his career on being able to read people, but Jamal had shown him just how limited and flawed that skill really was. When Jake stepped inside, the normal buzz of the dealership greeted him. Salespeople were busy with customers, phones rang, and the hum of commerce filled the air. Yet, despite the familiar surroundings, Jake felt like an outsider in his own space. He could no longer shake the weight of what had transpired. The guilt gnawed at him. But there was also something else growing within him, an awareness that had been missing before. Across the room, Tom, the younger salesman, caught Jake's eye and gave him a small nod. He had seen the way Jake had handled the situation with Jamal today, and it seemed like a silent acknowledgement that things were different now. Maybe not fixed, but different. Tom wasn't one to offer praise easily, but Jake knew what that nod meant. It wasn't about the sale, it was about growth. Jake returned to his desk, the paperwork for Jamal's purchase still sitting in his inbox. He stared at the folder for a moment before pushing it aside. It wasn't just about making money anymore. Jake had always prided himself on being the top salesman, on knowing how to close deals and charm customers. But for the first time, that wasn't enough. Before he could dwell on it any longer, Mr. Whitman, the dealership owner, approached Jake's desk. His polished shoes clicked against the floor, and his tailored suit seemed to shine in the sunlight streaming through the windows. Whitman's presence was always commanding, and today was no different. "Jake," Whitman said, his voice smooth but firm, "I see you closed the deal on the Ferrari." Jake nodded, trying to gauge Whitman's tone. "Yes, sir. Mr. King came in and finalized everything today." Whitman leaned against Jake's desk, his eyes scanning the showroom as he spoke. "I also heard from Tom that there were some complications with the way things were handled yesterday. Is that true?" Jake felt his heart rate pick up. He wasn't sure how much Tom had told Mr. Whitman, but he wasn't about to dodge the truth. After everything that had happened, he knew he had to be honest. "Yeah," Jake admitted, his voice steady. "I misjudged Mr. King when he came in. I made assumptions based on his appearance, and I didn't treat him the way I should have. I take full responsibility for that." Whitman turned his gaze to Jake, his expression unreadable. For a few long seconds, he didn't say anything, letting Jake's confession hang in the air. Then, finally, he sighed. "That's good to hear, Jake," Whitman said, his tone softening. "We all make mistakes, but what matters is that we learn from them. This dealership runs on reputation, and it's not just about the cars we sell, it's about how we treat people. Every customer who walks through those doors deserves respect, no matter how they look or what we think we know about them. Jake nodded, feeling the weight of Whitman's words settle on him. I understand, he said quietly. Whitman straightened up, giving Jake a long, appraising look. Good. Make sure it doesn't happen again. With that, Whitman turned and walked away, leaving Jake alone once more. The conversation wasn't harsh, but it had made things crystal clear. The dealership's success wasn't just about luxury cars and high sales figures. It was about integrity, about treating people with the decency they deserved. And Jake had almost lost sight of that. As the afternoon wore on, Jake reflected on everything that had happened over the past 2 days. He had learned a hard lesson, but he knew that it was one he wouldn't forget. The way he had treated Jamal wasn't just a blip. It was a symptom of a deeper issue, one that he had to confront in himself. Jake didn't want to be the kind of person who judged others based on appearances, and now he had the opportunity to change. Later that evening, as the dealership was closing, Jake found himself lingering by the front doors. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the parking lot. He took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was a new beginning, a chance to move forward with a clearer understanding of who he was and who he wanted to be. As he locked the doors and turned to leave, Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from Jamal. Thanks for everything, Jake. I hope next time we can start on better terms. Take care. Jake smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. He typed back a quick reply. Thank you, Jamal. I'm looking forward to it. Take care of that Ferrari. With that, Jake pocketed his phone and headed to his car. The dealership behind him was quiet, the day's work done. But for Jake, the real work was just beginning.